morning. I'm Noelle Stensrud. I'm here again this morning to interview some graduates from Chisago City High School and to help bring the memories and the history of Chisago City High School back to life. So I will let you each introduce yourselves and we will get started. Thank you.
Jim Froberg. I graduated in 1952 from Chisago City High School, and I was honored.
Very good.
Leilani Dahl Freeman, the class of 1964, Chisago City High School.
John Henrickson, class of 1965, graduate from Chisago High School.
Carol Stromgren, class of 1957, Chisago City High School.
Jim Molnar from Chisago City, class of 1965.
Very good. Any of you have memories of the country schools?
I do.
Tell us.
I was at Amelun till 1948, and I walked to school a mile and a half, uphill both ways. And the funny part about it was my neighbor would bring milk to the creamery. And he lived a mile north, and I'd watch when he left the driveway. I'd run down to the corner and I'd get a ride, and he'd say, "Would you like a ride?" every day. And he smoked a cigarette all the time, never left his mouth, and the ashes down here. He lived to be 95.
My grandmother actually talked about actually going to school, and she actually lived in a farm out where Peterson companies are now. She lived on that farm before they moved into Chisago. And she always talked about actually walking to school up to Old Town. And she actually walked from that the Wyoming Road and actually went over a bridge on the Narrows between Little Green and Big Green. Mm-hmm. And she said that actually was her path, that the kids walked to school up in Old Town to go to grade school.
What was the name of that school?
That's a good question.
And you know, could you guess what year that was?
Oh, let's see. No, I couldn't.
Because that has to be quite a ways back.
Yeah.
Because that bridge existed in the very, very early days.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So that always kind of stuck out in my mind as far as thinking about when we went to school, of walking home from school, when, you know, which was no big thing, but actually for her, that was good. It was a good trip.
Jim, what school was Amelun? What was the name of the school? Do you remember?
Just called Amelun.
Amelun Country School?
Yes. It's still there.
It's still there.
It's a historical building now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Any other schools you remember the names of around the area?
And we played a game called Wolf. You run around the school and one person was it, and you kept on till you got everybody tackled, and it was no helmets, no nothing. It was just war.
Well, the country schools that still existed when I was going to school, but they were no longer in use, were Boo Schoolhouse, which I think you guys will remember, and we knew some Boos. Yep. And also there was Shafer School, which I believe that building is still in existence. And Carol, do you remember any more than that?
No.
Okay, I'm sure my memory isn't serving me, but there were more still in existence. Oh, Franconia School, which was used as the Franconia Town Hall for some time.
It still is.
Yeah, is it? Yeah. And Boo School, I think, was destroyed by fire ultimately.
Something memorable about Chisago City High School.
I moved to Chisago in 1948 because my brother got married, and then we moved off the farm, thank goodness. I didn't have to help. Anyway, Mr. Molnar was a football coach, and I was going to go out for football. So I goes down there in the locker room, and he hands me all this stuff, and he said, "Get dressed." Well, I'd never undressed in front of anybody else, so I went in the shower to dress, and he said, "No, you can dress right out here." I never forget that. That was so clever.
You can tell us a bit
Well, the thing that I remember, I moved to Chisago City in 1951 in December, and there was no, you have to know that in those days there was no kindergarten. So I did not attend kindergarten, but then the next fall then I attended first grade. And Miss Bloom, who I'm sure everyone here knows, was the first grade teacher, and she had been, at that time she was already ready for retirement. This is 1952. And she had taught, she was a single lady, a spinster she would have been called in those days, and she was very, very well known. And the first thing you learned when you went to first grade is Miss Bloom had the baby board up, and if you misbehaved, or I don't know, I was never on it, but I mean, you got your name put on the baby board. Well, that following year, now remember, this is 1952, this is very shortly after World War II, there is a severe teacher shortage in the U.S. because of I am the first of the baby boomers. I was born in 1946, and we were, you know, all the classes just, my class was twice the size of the preceding class. I mean, and so teachers were in very short supply. So when Miss Bloom retired, the whole town, and I mean the whole town, because everyone had had her for first grade, came to the auditorium, which is still existing as of this moment, as we're taped at Chisago City, to honor Miss Bloom. And I remember it vividly. I was only in first grade, but I remember it vividly. The ironic thing was, the next fall, Miss Bloom was back. They couldn't find a teacher. They couldn't find a teacher, and she had to teach one more year.
Okay, how about you? What, you have a memory of high school?
Oh, yeah, actually grade school, and Jimmy and myself actually shared this experience.
Jim who?
Molnar,
oh.
Excuse me, not Stromgren. But I think I always tell the story of us being the first kids that were bused in the state of Minnesota. And what I mean by that in reality is that when we were going to enter fourth grade, they were doing an addition on to the school, in the grade school, the new wings. And we actually had to get on our bus or walk to school to begin with, and from there, every morning, we actually got bused to the school in Wyoming, Minnesota, in which case we spent fourth grade in the school in Wyoming while they were doing construction, because like Leilani said, she was the year before us, the population exploded, as well as our grade also. We were in 47, and that class was, I believe, the largest even after Lonnie's.
Oh, so they got bigger. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it got bigger. So we actually ended up being, as I say, bused to Wyoming, and we spent fourth grade in the school of Wyoming.
I don't remember anything particular. I remember band and chorus and going to, what did we, not state, there was district competitions, regions. I remember those well, because then I was into music.
Cool, that'll be great. Okay, how about you, Jim?
Well, we're talking about the additions on the school, and under the floors, they had trapdoors in about every section. And once we found the tunnels, that was our way into the cafeteria or wherever, from the boiler room, whatever. But they did have, we'd be crawling down there, and they were probably electrical pipes and who knows what, mechanical things. And there'd be little inserts off to the side where they'd have wafers and water. And we ate them, of course, but somebody said that was there for when the nuclear pressure was on, that you could go down there and survive on these wafers and water.
Oh, we should definitely mention that, because yes, I mean, we were there in the era of...
Everyone down there was no wafers left.
No, but in our grade school years, there was definitely the air raid shelter mentality. The hospital, built in '57, was built as a shelter. The whole lower level, it's built like a fortress. It's still built, that building still exists. And the school, and I never knew that, but that's really interesting. We should mention that when Jim was crawling around under the school, that his father was a teacher.
Okay, that brings us around to favorite teachers.
Well, in grade school, Mrs. Rylander, I always liked her. And she would walk to school from the south end of Chisago Lake every day to school.
Winter and summer.
Yeah, walk
And everybody'd see her, but I always liked her. And maybe because she passed me, I don't know.
She taught second grade.
Yes.
Yeah.
How about a high school teacher?
Well, the shop teacher was pretty mean.
That was his dad.
I could have built the Taj Mahal and got a C. It didn't make any difference, so he treated everybody equal.
Can I answer one thing about the shop teacher now? His dad was the shop teacher, and there was a kid named Garmin Green that just moved in from California, and he'd carry a knife in his pocket. One day, Mr. Molnar said, do this or that. He pulled that knife, and your dad took that knife away as quick as he pulled it. So.
Okay, Carol, favorite teacher?
There was I think she was 4th grade, Mrs. Barron. Did anybody else have her? She was good, but Mrs. Marie Henrickson was a home ec teacher. And she was very good, and she took, I don't know if it was just the senior girls. In 1957, we went to Southdale, and that had just opened. So that was a very big deal. Field trip. Yes.
Yes, you have to realize Southdale was one of the first shopping centers in the U.S.
Yeah.
It was a very big
Very
deal.
big.
Yeah.
Okay, how about you, John?
I guess I'd have to say that Mr. Tebben, Pete Tebben.
How do you spell that?
T-E-B-B-E-N, yeah. He was a math teacher, and I guess I tried to perform well both as in his class as well as when later on when I played basketball for him. So he was, a lot of people would probably say he was quite strict and structured, but again, that was something that I was always instilled in me, as well as Mrs. Rylander, as far as from the grade school.
Well, for me, there's no question but that my favorite elementary school teacher was Doris Brand. And she taught 4th grade. Mrs. Brand, to this day, she is still alive. She is more than 100 years old. And she had no children. And the year we were in 4th grade, she went, and this would be not politically correct in these days either. She went around the class. We were coming up to Christmas vacation, and she went around the class and asked everybody what they wanted for Christmas. And after, we were a large class, as I said, we were more than 50 kids, and you have to realize in one room, there was only one 1st grade teacher, one 2nd grade teacher, one 3rd grade teacher, one 4th grade teacher, no matter how big the class was. And our desks were so crammed in those classrooms until they built the addition that he was talking about. And when we got done, one of us, I said, well, Mrs. Brand, what do you want for Christmas? And I will never forget it, because she said, I want a little boy and a little girl under my Christmas tree. And that was the year she adopted a brother and sister. They adopted those children that following year. So Mrs. Brand and I always had a close connection, because we had a hobby day, and I had a collection of pictures, like cream pictures, like that. And she found that out when I brought my pictures, and she said, I have a picture collection. She'd been collecting pictures for many years, and she gave me a few of them. She would have me help when poor teachers had no help whatsoever, and they had to do everything. They even had to do the eye exams. So she had to give all the kids an eye exam, and so I would sit at her desk, and she would give the exam, and then I would write down their scores for her because she didn't have anyone to help her do this, and it's 50-some kids in the class as part of the school year. So, and she would also let me go. We had no, it's not like today, there was no school library. There was no big media center. Each classroom had 2 short bookshelves, and that was your classroom's library. And I had read all the books, and the ones that I wanted, interested in 4th grade, so she would let me go to the 5th grade and 6th grade rooms to get library books. I remember that. And in high school, my favorite teacher was the English teacher, Mr. Galach. And his son is still at Chisago Lakes today. He was a very matter-of-the-fact teacher, and he taught me all about Greek and Latin roots, and I'm an editor and reporter and writer, and boy, it served me my entire life. And I very much enjoyed his classes.
So just to add a real quick comment, Lonnie mentioned Mrs. Brandt, and actually we didn't get to have her in 4th grade because one of the children that she adopted was in our grade, Jim and Jim Molnar and myself. So she had to or wanted to go to a different class, actually ended up a different school, I believe, at that time. So that was just another little side note on that.
Okay, Jim?
My favorite teachers were two. It was Mr. Rigg and Mr. Molnar. And I only say that because I was only concerned in high school with athletics. I didn't think that I would have to do anything else. But they were always willing to listen, and that's so important. And I feel that I didn't smoke because I went out for sports, and I never did, so I'm so fortunate. So.
Very nice. Okay, well, we're still on teachers. How about classes? Did you have any classes that you have memories from or that you liked?
I have one English class. Mrs. Stone was the teacher, and Bruce Struble was hiding up in the vent, and she'd ask for the name, and he'd talk to her, but he didn't know. She didn't know where he was, and John Freeman was under the desk, and it was just a riot all the time. That poor lady, poor Mrs. Stone.
I remember that.
Oh, it was wild.
Oh, well, I don't think I could pass this opportunity without mentioning Thora Hard. Thora Hard, and her husband was also a teacher, Gordon Hard. He later was a principal at Taylor's Falls, I believe. Thora taught science. She taught biology. If you picture school marm in the most strict sense, that was Thora. She was extremely stern. And but she also, which people didn't always discover, had a fabulous dry sense of humor. So if you really got to know her, she was really quite a delightful person. So our first day in biology class, and those of you who are here may remember that we were studying about paramecium. This was 9th grade biology, I believe. And so we all had to go home and draw a diagram, a picture of a paramecium. So the next, it's a very simple organism. It's basically an oblong with a few hairy things coming out. And we turned in our papers, and Thora was standing at the front of the room, which was also the chemistry lab, so it had a sink and a Bunsen burner and things at her station at the front of the room. And she stood up before us and she said, "Now that I handed out your papers, I want you to look at your grades." And we looked at the grades, and I don't remember what my grade was. It wasn't an A, which I was used to, but people were like around me, like in shock. I could hear and she said, "Now I want you to pass them all back." And then she said, "These are the worst drawings I've ever seen, and if you think any of you are going to pass this class with drawings like this," and she held all of our papers up and lit the Bunsen burner and set all of our papers on fire. And promptly dropped them in the sink, which thank God was at hand, and put them out. And I can tell you that nobody ever turned in a messy paramecium or any other drawing after that. But it was a very, very interesting class, and I enjoyed Thora for many years to come. But yes, she could be very stern.
There was Bob Wilson, as well as Mr. Romola, that were quite new teachers out of college when they came, and I don't know as far as their discipline, at least capabilities were there. I remember we had a math class with Mr. Romola up in the second floor, and there was always a little discipline problem, and that room had an old cloakroom or hanging cloakroom that had two doors, one on each end and some lockers in between. And it used to be, we'd almost look like it was a track because Mr. Romola would get up and someone would act up and the child would run in one door and Mr. Romola would go in after him and they'd go around in a circle for about a couple of minutes chasing him.
My class must have been much better behaved. I don't remember. He was a first-year teacher when we.
And by the time he got the kid to get him out of class, everybody was kind of in a pandemonium as far as that discipline.
Well, to add to that, Mr. Romola's trademark was, remember in those days, we didn't get typewritten tests. Tests were handwritten and run on the mimeograph machine in the teacher's lounge, which was the most smoke-filled room you could find in the U.S. You could not, when you opened the door, the smoke billowed from the room. Anyway, so we had mimeograph tests, handwritten, and at the end of every test, Mr. Romola, you can always tell when someone finished their test, because at the end of the test, he had the most corny joke. Every test there was a joke, and you could always tell when someone got to the end because they'd groan or laugh.
What was it, favorite class? I think English, because that's what I liked best. But nothing specific.
I'd say when we were seniors, I think we were seniors when we had Joe Galach.
Yep.
And I liked that class. I passed it too. That's why I liked it.
Okay, so it sounds fun to hear about lunches.
Well, they had government cheese and milk, I remember. When we were in grade school, didn't the government give the schools a lot of cheese?
So you get a lot of macaroni and cheese.
And cheese sticks. I mean, it wasn't the best, but we didn't. It was great to get lunch. It was, but
wasn't there a lot of hot dishes?
everything was more like home cooking than.
It was home cooked at school. Everything was cooked there.
Sure.
I remember hamburger gravy.
Oh yeah.
On the mashed potatoes.
Oh, you got it was a lot of gravy and a lot of hot dish, and I hated the macaroni and cheese personally, but most of the kids loved it. But
Fridays were bad.
Fridays were bad because it was fish.
I have a couple of things about lunch. Mrs. DeLynn was the cook there, and boy, if the older boys or the bigger boys got whatever needed, she just poured it on. And the other thing is, Larry Lofgren and B.J. Moose and we used to have punch tickets. Well, we had odd man to see whose punch ticket you're going to use. Well, it was fixed. So B.J. paid for all of us for I don't know how long.
Really?
Yeah. Well, that's okay because his father was the banker. No, in grade school, because they got government surplus supplies, they would come around mid-afternoon, I don't know if they did, with trays full of peanut butter sandwiches. I can remember we'd get like a mid-afternoon snack, and they'd come into each classroom in grade school, and there'd just be open-faced peanut butter sandwiches. And now I don't even know if they can serve peanut butter anymore because of the nut allergies.
The other probably that sticks out with me was when we were in Wyoming and that school was smaller, and this influx of kids from Chisago kind of put a stress on it. Seemed like the lunch program over there, and I remember some of the things that they cooked up over there. Their whole cooking facility wasn't like Chisago, so we always used to get monitored that we ate everything. And the old trick was to always drink the carton of milk to begin with and empty the milk, and then if it was some bad soup, we'd always pour the soup back into the milk container so it looked like we had eaten everything.
Did you get enough food, you said?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we got way more than enough food. In high school, I didn't ever eat lunch because it was so starchy and so calorie laden. Every day in high school I ate an apple for lunch, and we had very long lunch hours. This was not like kids now, I think they barely get time to eat. We had like 45 minutes, I am sure, at least for lunch. And in high school I got permission from the principal to bring my phonograph to school, to the gym, if you can imagine, and we would have a We would dance in the gym. I would bring records, and we had so much time, but at lunch, that I'd bring my phonograph, we'd play records, and dance in the gym at lunch hour. Did that through whole high school.
Yeah. Do you remember that at all?
No, that was,
Different era, yeah.
well, I was kind of a outspoken individual.
Well, not many boys danced back when I was in school.
Oh, we were the twist era. Everybody danced.
Did they have lunch tables? Like, was there a cool lunch I mean, did everybody mix, or were there, you know, sometimes they can have lunch tables?
I don't know. I didn't go to high school lunch, so I don't know.
Wasn't it in the gym?
Yeah, it was in the gym. It was just
no.
rows of tables, wasn't
What's
it?
that?
In grade school, but in high school it was in the cafeteria at the.
The first
Yeah, but
grade.
when I was in grade school, it was in the gym.
But after that, we had our own lunch. We had a lunchroom.
We had a lunchroom after they remodeled.
Right. It was part of the addition you talked about.
It was part of the
Yeah.
addition.
Right.
That
That's
was
where
at
the
it.
tunnels led to.
Right.
up
Previous to
the
that, we ate in the gym and then moved to the
Yeah.
cafeteria.
Yeah, that's why we could use the gym for dancing, because we're in the new at that time lunchroom.
How did that work? Did the first grade go first or second? How did that?
I don't know. We stood in line. I know that.
Yeah, I don't remember. All I remember was the long lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember standing in line.
Yeah.
And that was essentially it.
Waiting for Mrs. Keysburg to punch your ticket.
Yep.
Yeah, the other thing you should understand about Chisago City School is that all 12 grades were in one building. And, you know, I think students today would not even fathom that. I mean, when you came to first grade, you passed in the hall. I mean, seniors were passing by you to get to the biology room, which was across the hall from my 5th grade classroom. No, there's good and bad to that. I mean, yes, you know, you saw more of the carrying on of the high school kids perhaps, and maybe there was some harassment of little kids by big kids, but I don't remember a lot of it. No. But also, I think you were inspired to be a part of the high school, you know, and you were very much involved, like in going to the class plays. I mean, every single child in that school went to every class play, and I think that was an advantage of having a small school.
I think in that same respect, you felt like, you know, when you progressed on to junior high, senior high, it wasn't, you know, like you were going to somewhere new and being afraid of what was, you know, or saw new people. Or students, I should say. It was more or less a one large school. And,
right, you knew every teacher and every student and every custodian knew every child by name.
I can't remember anything.
Well, I was in the class play, the bag, something about a bag. I can't even think. Blue bag. But what I remember about, we used to have a carnival. I don't know if any of you remember that. We'd have a carnival every year. The whole gym would be loaded with different, and we'd have a king and a queen.
I think I do. That's before our time.
I got to be king.
Well,
And Nada Zacharias was a queen. I remember that now. But
I just saw Nada.
it was a fun thing. Every year we'd have a carnival.
Yeah. Our class plays, you have to know that auditorium, which is still existing as we sit here. The stage was very small, and the only dressing room was the smoke-filled teacher's room, teacher's lounge. And the backstage area was not as wide as this table. I mean, literally around. So if you had to go from one entrance to get to the door and the other entrance, amid all the props and stuff that was stored back, it was a circus to be in a play. But the whole town came anytime you had a concert or a play. It was just part of the community, very much so. I think we're lucky that our school today is also very much part of the community, but certainly was then. Now band, when we were in school, marching band was a very big, popular thing. Now I think they struggle to get kids in marching band. When we were in marching band, we marched all over. We marched in the Aquatennial Parade. We marched in parades at St. Cloud. Jack Tingblad was the band director. We had an extremely popular band and performed in the summer in the park in Chisago City. There was a Friday night band concert every Friday throughout June and July, and the kids came and performed in the band shell, which has just recently been removed from that park and put at the skating rink, Chucky Lundquist Park. So band was very popular. And the other thing that I will say about extracurricular activities when I was there, the school was so small that you could be, as Carol said, you could be in chorus and you could be in band. You could be on student council. You could, if you wanted to be involved, you could be involved in everything. The boys could play football, basketball. They could play every sport. I mean, and be likely to play. I think that's one thing now that is very different. I mean, that kids don't have that same, probably they have a higher level of skills learned, but they don't have as many broad opportunities.
Right.
But there were no girls' sports.
No.
Just Phi-Ed.
So yeah, along that same line, just to expand, I always remember Jack Tingblad, he in the marching band, he kind of introduced a drastic change from the old wool band suits. In the summertime, we actually had shorts. We had a beret that we wore.
And a sash.
And what?
A sash.
And a sash that went around our school colors, where we marched, and it was really fun to do that, rather than I think back of some of those, if we'd had to wear those old wool band uniforms, that was a tradition. So we were quite innovative. And like Lonnie and the rest of us said, you know, we were in the school size. If you could kind of almost walk and talk and chew gum, you played sports, and you were, you know, everybody came out for those things, and it developed, I think, a lot of kids that wouldn't have shown interest or been able to participate, and so it was both from the standpoint of the bands and the chorus that I know I went to there, whether I sang it very good or not, you were a number, and you went in and you participated in it, and that is, I think, the big difference, and I think I really felt that it helped me throughout even going on to school or other socializing after school, that you actually did participate in a lot of things.
What did you play in the band?
I played a cornet, and yeah, in the band, and tried to sing in the chorus, but I can remember that played football or whatever, basketball, and sometimes when I was younger, I played in the band, but then I was in the sports and went back and forth from those things.
Yeah, that's quite an opportunity.
Yeah.
Carol, you liked band and choir.
Oh, I did like band and choir.
Tell us what you remember.
But I remember the senior class play was called Pure as the Driven Snow. There's a picture in the annual here of it. And it was really different. I mean, it was so much fun.
And were you in the band? In
the band. I played clarinet. I helped on the piano sometimes. And in chorus.
Very good. Jim?
Well, you see, I did play the tuba for a while.
Wow.
But if you got out the last hour to go football practice, that's when they had band. And they had a choice of being, he said, you want to be a piccolo player or you want to play football? That's the last I saw of the tuba.
Wow, sports, that's what I lived for. I can remember the biggest district tournament. We were playing Forest Lake at Pine City, and BJ Moose made a basket to put it into overtime, and Forest Lake hadn't lost. They had 17, 18 in a row, and they were a lot taller and tougher than us. And then in overtime, I made 2 free throws to win the game, 70-71, and we went on to the region, and we won a game there too. But I just think Mr. Rigg and Mr. Molnar were just my favorite. I've said that before.
And what made them great coaches?
Well, because they were good listeners, and they'd always want to help you improve. And I think that was great. But I was into, my favorite thing was track, because we just had it the 1 year, but we just romped at the district. So, and it's interesting because my daughter has a record on the board here for the 100 since 1983, and my granddaughter has a record in the 220 on the same board. And I went on up to St. Cloud after to run track, and it was interesting.
Yeah. Our claim to fame of our class in sports was basketball, and they won 21 games in a row the year, and then they lost at the second game at the regions, so they didn't make it to state, but it was a marvelous year in basketball. But the thing I want to say about sports is, those of you who were around when the Minnesota Twins were in the World Series, and you remember the roar of the Metrodome and that people would wear earplugs, a basketball game between Chisago City and Lindstrom. Now, these were two separate schools. The rivalry could not have been any greater. Everyone, and I mean everyone in town, came to that game. They were literally pouring out the doorways of the gym. There were hardly any sidelines on that gym, but people would actually stand. I mean, spectators would stand along the sidelines of the basketball court. I don't even know how it was allowed. We were in band, so fortunately we always had a seat because we were on the stage. And the roar inside that gymnasium was so loud that you could hear it outside. I mean, when the door opened, I'm sure you could hear it on the whole neighborhood. Those basketball games were breathtakingly spectacular games. And the football games were the same, but it wasn't the same as that atmosphere inside that gymnasium, which is probably going to be soon passing its day.
I have to agree with Lonnie for sure that class in basketball we had, and Coach Tebben really instilled some very basic basketball that was very good. Went up to Hibbing, that was in the regions, and played some very tough teams, and that actual final there was they played Cloquet that year with and a lot of those players from Cloquet, this Mike Forrest and Dave Meisner and so on, they all went on to were very good players in college at Winona and St. Cloud. And that was definitely a highlight, even though I didn't make the team. I was still a sophomore then, but we had such good players. But I also have to go along the same line as far as Jim Froberg here talked about playing Forest Lake in the district finals and making it. We also played them in my senior year. And back then, Forest Lake was tremendously big guys, and back then you couldn't dunk the ball during a game, but at that era you could dunk while you were in warm-ups. And I always remember coming out and doing our warm-ups, and we were out on the court first and doing the warm-ups, and we played Forest Lake, and the Forest Lake guys came out. And they had 6 guys in a row that were 6'4" or bigger. And they came out, and they all 6 of them dunked the ball in a row, and everybody roared, and we just stood there like this. What are we into? Well, we played them, and they must have been either we had a little defense or the bad shooting night, but we ended up losing by 1 point in the last few minutes of that. And we were so over-talented, and they went on to region, but that was something that always stuck out in my mind as far as playing.
I don't have any.
Were either of you cheerleaders?
No.
My wife was.
Okay.
And I got to talk about that too, because we only had 5 girls in our class, and I married one of them. Anyway, we were playing football against Chi High, Lindstrom, and he was kind of trying to date my wife or my girlfriend at that time, Hall, and not Hall, Nygren. So when we were playing football, I remember them. Nygren was carrying the ball coming around end, and I was on defensive end, and I really took care of him.
Well, the only thing I can say about, we should say a lot more about football, because football was a very, very, and you know, Jim Molnar was an icon, I think would be the word.
Definitely, definitely.
And so I don't think there's any person who played football in the era that he was there that he isn't probably living in their memory today. And he was kind of he could be really gruff and he could be really tough and he didn't mess around. But I think, like you said, he really had a heart for all the kids individually. But yeah, football when I was there was, again, it was very popular. Everyone came out. I used to, my first job was working at Jim's Drive-In, which was owned by Jim Molnar, the football coach, and Jim Molnar, his dad. And it was my very first job car hopping, and they'd start practice in August. And they did 2-a-days, and it was like brutal. I mean, it was like 90 and humid like it is today here or tomorrow. But they would all horde into the drive-in after football practice, and it was just a sea of cars and chaos, and you couldn't keep track of the mugs or the trays or anything else. And I worked one summer there, and Jim's wife Dorothy was my first boss. She was a marvelous boss. But she had the greatest patience because I was the world's worst car hop, I swear. I never did it again. I never waitressed again. I worked in the bank the next summer. But the football team coming in for that after practice rush is very memorable.
I can mention one thing about football. We used to have to run up and down the hill behind
down the hill. Yep. Lakeside School was
many times
right on Little Green Lake, so there was a steep hill, and that was the tradition that you knew you had to go through. And Coach Molnar would stand on the top, and you'd always say, "You're gonna run the smoke right out." So we really dreaded that running the hill every year. But it
Jim, did you have to do that too?
Oh. Twice as much.
Twice as much, and that was the truth too. Yeah.
Jim, you didn't have any football memories, and surely you have some.
Well, like I said, I probably ran the hill twice as many times. But I was also the practice dummy a lot. He'd use me as an example all the time.
Oh, yeah.
What to do or what not to do. And, yeah, he could get away with it with me. But I used to go to the games, ride the bus when I was first, second grade. They put me in the, they step up into the bus. That's where I sat. The bus was full. Sit there and watch the white line go by up to Hinkley or Moose Lake or wherever we were going.
Well, my ex-husband, who had played football, would say, you always knew if the game wasn't going well because Jim, he would throw down his cap and say, "God darn it!" he couldn't curse, but that you always knew
Red baseball hat.
Somebody was in trouble when that baseball cap hit the ground.
If you weren't a senior, the seniors got first pick of the equipment, which was tough.
Not a good pick anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
so you better find a pair of shoes that fit, if they had anything, and they weighed about 8 pounds apiece back then. And I think they had 4 girdles, which were for the running backs, Otherwise, everybody else had to wear hip pads. So the starters got to get their equipment first, and then if you were juniors and sophomores, you might have a size 12 shoe and wear a size 8. That's what there was.
Yeah, we
Whatever
didn't.
was left.
You know, nowadays I think everybody buys their own shoes. There's a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
equipment
Then
and whatever.
helmets, too.
Back then it was, this big box of shoes that you went to, and you almost fought to get in line to try and get the best pair of shoes, or hip pads, or like Jimmy said, wrap this, what they'd call a girdle around that just padded your hips, stuck out, most uncomfortable thing that you could barely run in.
The rib pads.
And the rib pads, and so it was really one of those days that you looked forward to and tried to get in line the first you could, or otherwise you wouldn't get any equipment.
Times have changed.
Okay. Spread out your glory, boys. Spread out your fame. We'll get through
We have to look it up.
I'm wondering if it's in here. Isn't that terrible that we can't remember it?
You can sing too.
But she can't.
Spread out your glories, boys. Spread
We're going to start lower. Fame. Get right in there and fight it. We will win this game. Rah, rah, rah.
Then I don't know the rest.
Stamp your colors true. That's why. See, isn't this terrible? Spread out your glory, boys. Spread out your fame. Get right in there and fight it. We will win this game. Rock, rock, rock. For your honors too. Chisago High. Okay, in regard to our pathetic school song performance, which we hope to improve on, you know, our name was Indians, which of course would be totally unacceptable today. So we were the Chisago City Indians, yes, you're right. The school song did include INDIANS.
Indians, they're the best.
Remember that one? See,
Did you just find the song?
No.
No.
So they did have that.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the other right at the end of the school song. Then they go INDIANS. Indians, they're the best. And then,
We had proms at the high school.
Oh, you did?
well,
We were at, what was it called, Castlewood?
Oh.
You know?
Forest Lake.
Yeah, in Forest Lake is where we had it.
Oh, really?
I think for 4 years.
Or am I thinking something?
you're thinking of something. We had in '65, our class prom was at the other Forest Lake Country Club.
Oh, that's right.
The newer one, which is just across from Castlewood and down the ways, but that was a Hawaiian type theme that we had decorated up, and I always remember that Annalie Melander came out and danced at
She did the whole dance.
the hula dance or whatever.
Yeah.
She was a year ahead of us, but I don't know how we ended up remembering that she did that, but that was kind of a part or an act during this Hawaiian theme for the prom of 1965.
And he wore that shirt today just
just
Our prom was still the era when we had it in the gymnasium. We did not go away anywhere. We decorated the gym with crepe paper, streamers, and we purchased through catalogs a themed decor. And so, for example, I think Evening in Paris was the year I was a sophomore, because the sophomores could be maids and like attendants. You served, what they served, all you served was punch, because that's all there was. But I know I was a French maid. I had a French maid costume for that prom, yes.
Yeah.
And for junior prom, I was the junior class president, and this is how different prom was. Today when kids have prom, they start taking pictures in their formal attire, like at noon on the day of prom, because they're, they spend, then they go off to the city somewhere. And when we had prom, the same day of prom was state music contest. And many of us, including myself, were performing in state music contests. So we had to go down to the university, perform in state music contests. I had my committee, because I was on, the student council had to do the prom and the class officers, and they were back at the gym frantically stringing toilet paper, and our theme was Roman holiday, and we had pillars with ivy and columns, and they were decorating the gym, and so we raced back on the bus from the cities, from music contests. I ran into the gym to see if the gym was decorated, and then I ran out of the gym, got in my car, and drove to the beauty shop to get my hair done at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then raced home to get to prom. I mean, it was so different.
Did everyone wear formal dresses, suits, and
Oh yes, yeah. Short formals were in when the year I went to prom.
I was wondering what you mean by stringing toilet paper.
No, crepe paper. Well, first you had to string wires, and then the twisted crepe paper went over it the other direction. And the year that they had, I don't think it was our year, I think it was the Paris one, the French one, they had put a fountain in the middle of the gym floor.
And it leaked.
And it leaked.
And so the floor got, the wood floor got all ripped.
It was a disaster. They had to replace the floor.
So I remember there was, after that, and I don't...
It was banned.
Yeah. They
couldn't have water.
They kind of suggested that maybe the proms should be somewhere else.
Oh, and that's why, okay.
Why not using the gym anymore. So.
But dances, this Chisago City Lindstrom rivalry, my first date with my ex-husband was at a sock hop after the football game at Chi High.
Yeah.
And
they combined for a dance?
We would combine for a dance. And it was after the game, so it didn't start till like 9:30, 10 o'clock by the time the players changed clothes and got out, and I remember that. The other thing that people should be aware of today is that Chisago City, during the 60s, the community center in Chisago City on Friday nights, Saturday nights in the summer, was a mecca for bands, well-known bands like the Trashmen, and bands that made hit records. And
the Peppermint Club.
It was called the Peppermint Club due to the peppermint twist. I mean, this was the era of the twist. Twist all night was not funny. We would twist all night. I can remember my side aching so I could hardly walk. I mean, we would literally, and people came not just from Chisago and Lindstrom, but from the whole area, from Forest Lake and North Branch.
Right there.
It was packed. Yeah. It was huge.
They actually had a row along the outside of old theater chairs that were there, and they actually painted every other one red and white to make it look like the Peppermint Club. So, right. Our big thing, at least I remember of homecoming, was down at the bottom of the hill by Little Green Lake. We always had a bonfire, okay, and people would come and stock up that bonfire with whatever. I mean, it was anywhere from big logs to this to that, whatever. And it was always kind of a rivalry. We would have to watch that fire because the kids from Lindstrom would try to start the bonfire on fire before we actually had it. So it was quite an event.
How tall was the wood stack?
Oh, tall. The goal, I have to say this, the goal was always, if they could possibly, get an outhouse on the top.
Yeah.
This is the era when people still had outhouses, on their farms. Yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, around the lakes, there was lots.
We had an outhouse I grew up on the lake. We had still an outhouse on our property.
Way back.
Throw that on the top?
Yeah, they wanted that to be on the
Get
top.
that on the top. Yeah.
Way back, they put an outhouse on the school between the gym and the high school every Halloween.
Yeah. Got a classic one. I wasn't involved, but I knew quite a few of them. They, and especially it was out of Leilani class, they
were
ended up going over to Wyoming to a turkey farm, Fedge's turkey farm. And I don't know how many turkeys they had caught, but they
I heard about this.
let them into the gym. And the old gym, which is still there, you can imagine there's the steel rafters that run across there. They crawled up, flew up on, and sat up on the rafters. And well, you can say they crapped all
Was
over.
there an event in there? Was there a game or something? I mean, or what?
No, I don't. They just did it as a prank. I mean, it wasn't basketball or whatever then. It was.
Did anybody get in trouble for that?
Well,
No, I heard about this from my classmates. It was the boys in my class, and you have to realize our class, the Wyoming school had later, at 7th grade, come over to Chisago. So kids from Wyoming at 7th grade had come over to join our class. So it was, some of those boys were from Wyoming area where this turkey farm was located. I think that they said that they eventually got called into the office, but it was kind of handled very quietly, and they just had to pay. They had to pay for the turkeys. They had to go back and pay Fedge's for the turkeys and help clean up the mess. And I think that was all. I mean, today they'd have been in court, but it was all handled very.
well, there was an extra turkey that ended up in my sister's car.
One extra turkey, yeah. What happened?
When she went out to go to church or wherever it was, opened the car door, there was a turkey in the front seat. Oh, no. Behind the steering wheel. If I remember right, they asked to pay for that turkey. It tasted good. No, I don't know how we got rid of it.
The Young House, what was the Young House thing up on who did that or how did
Whoever get one.
Well,
That was
that was
a bunch of kids that had graduated from the school, I think, and I think Richard Peterson was involved, and some of those guys.
as in Richard Pinky?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So how did they get that outhouse up there?
I don't know, but it always happened.
Well, the prank that I have wasn't directly related to school. It happened during the summer in Chisago City, and the organist at Zion Lutheran Church was a single gentleman named Mansfield Johnson, and he boarded in a home off of Old Town Road. And I have another one after this one too. And just miraculously, when he came out in the morning, he couldn't open the door onto the porch. It was an older house that had a front porch because his Volkswagen was sitting there. The boys had lifted the Volkswagen onto the porch and blocked the door to the house. The other one did involve a teacher, and that was also a teacher who lived in Old Town Road, Carl Jar. And he lived across the street from my ex-husband, so we know this in detail. His wife, they had a newer home, a small newer home, and their car was parked in the driveway, and this was in the spring of the year, I believe, and his wife came out and she was just, this car smells like skunk. Did you hit a skunk? Why? And he was out washing the car and washing the tires. And his wife was just like, do something about the skunk smell. Can't stand the skunk smell. Well, this went on for days until they found the skunk behind the back seat. Carl Jar taught like social studies at the school.
As far as my weekends, well, it wasn't just a weekend. You're talking about summer. Summer times I would mow lawns. I had about 3-4 lawns that I would mow, and then in the spring I would rake them to make some money. And I never had a car, so I didn't have to spend a lot of money. I just had a bicycle until I was out of high school. So it's different now. Everybody's got a car, and as soon as they got their license.
I worked at the Rainbow.
I suppose.
Yeah.
So I worked one summer, or maybe it was even two, on a picking cucumbers and radishes.
Describe that now. I was going to tell about that. Describe picking cucumbers.
Down in just outside of between Forest Lake and Wyoming. I didn't do so much of the cucumbers because that was a radish farm, but there was other people that went to cucumber farm. But you would put on, it was on a peat bog, and you actually put on these big heavy rubber boots, waders actually, because you had to sit out and it was wet and it was just hot. You'd sit and you'd pick cucumbers and you'd look at them and sort them and then wrap a rubber binder around them and stack up all of these cucumbers, and they'd come out and drive out and in a little caterpillar and pick up all of these radishes, and it was just boring and hot. And we actually, back in those days, we were so young, we didn't have a car, so we'd actually end up getting a ride from some parents there, but a lot of times we would end up hitchhiking. Back in those days, it was considered to be safe hitchhiking back and forth from those.
What did you get paid?
Oh, it was so much like, I don't know, a quarter a bundle or something, the bunch that you had to wrap up. And so depending upon how you felt that day or how hot it was, it varied. It was, you know, it was piecework, as well as then if you, some people picked cucumbers. And
yeah, you were picking radishes, what you were describing. I never did this, but one of my friends did this, and it was despicable. Yeah. Okay, so when you picked and you know how prickly cucumbers are and the vines, they laid on their stomachs on just like a wooden, low-lying wooden trailer thing that they dragged across the field of cucumbers, and you had to reach down and pick the cucumbers, throw them over your head behind you into the trailer, and you, on this bumpy field, that's how you went on your stomach picking cucumbers for hours.
I worked there 1 year. 65 cents an hour we got. And every Thursday, Gedney would come with a big semi, and we'd load that full of bushel baskets of pickles.
Did you have a summer job or?
Well, like I say, at the Rainbow.
Okay, yeah. How about the lake? You guys live by the lakes. Did you?
Well, that was every day.
Yeah, that was, you know, it was kind of lived on the lake, and it was kind of a common thing. You know, you went down and fished and anytime you wanted to, or you know, swimming. So it was. I guess the biggest kind of story I remember was. In Chisago Lake, there's an island out there, and the lake fluctuated quite a bit, in which there was, when it was low enough, there was a couple of guys that always had their fort out on the island, and they kind of moved on and got older, so we kind of took over the fort and the island, so to speak. And so I had a party sort of for a weekend where there was probably about 5 or 6 of us that we'd row the boat out, and we spent the evening out there, made a big bonfire, ran around and yelled like Indians, and it was so loud that there was some graduation parties. That was the year, part of the year that the Deputy Sheriff Grant Holmquist came down and drove down my folks' place on the shore, and he yelled out, "All right, who are you kids out there on that island?" And there was one of the guys, Stanley Brennan, I'll make the name because he never moved away, but he yelled out, "X, Y, and Z." And that was his famous comment back. Needless to say, when we rowed into shore the next day, Grant Holmquist was standing on shore and wanted to know who X, Y, and Z was.
Well, the lake, yeah, go ahead.
Taking swimming lessons or the Red Cross, you know.
At the beach, where was the beach?
At the beach.
Which beach?
Several places.
Well, several places. Where was it when you were?
That was down the road from the primary.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't.
Ours is
I
right.
mean, going west. I mean, going down to Big Green.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I know that beach. Okay.
That was, and we had it down. I remember going to swimming lessons and shivering right below the high school at that time. And then they switched over to Big Green at the end of the road down there, so that it moved around. Sandy places.
Yeah, so the lakes, I mean, they figured they were part of our lives, winter and summer.
I mean, everything was centered around the lakes. But my first swimming lessons were at Engdahl's Resort, which is on Stinson. And like you say, always, 8 o'clock in the morning, freezing, cold. And it was Red Cross swimming lessons, and they were in order. They would do the different towns in the county, and for some reason, we were always last. So it was always dog days. And the lake was as green as grass. I remember I used to have an allergy to the algae in the lake. I always ended up sick by the end of swimming lessons. And it was, we'd be standing out there shivering when we were little kids. I'll never forget it. Okay, so Engdahl's Resort, which was on Stinson, was the first place. Then it was below what was then the high school, and this, now the elementary school that's going away. So that was where the beach was for many years, down that steep hill, down those steep steps. And Green Lake was so full of weeds that when you would dive off the raft, you literally could get, you couldn't get out of the weeds. It was actually dangerous. When you dove, you couldn't get out of the weeds. And then it moved to the beach, which was out by Carnley in that area.
And that was nice.
And that was the beach the latter years. But we grew up in the lake. I grew up 2 houses down from John. We went swimming when I was a kid, once if not twice a day. Sometimes we were in the lake in the morning and in the afternoon.
Especially, back in those days, we really didn't have any air conditioning to speak of other than a fan or whatever. And I can always remember, about 10 o'clock at night or after even the news when it was really hot, my mom and dad would say, come on, we're going down to the lake and take a dip or, and cool off.
And right before dark was actually the perfect time to go swimming, right before. And also, when I was growing up, we had a huge yard, 9 acres, tons to mow. My dad would mow the only day my dad didn't mow grass was Sunday. He would, every night, he would come home from work and he would mow, because it was huge. We had 5 gardens and it was huge. But just that hour before dark, this is when I was like 7, 8 years old, he would say, okay, let's go fishing. And we would go down to the dock right before dusk, because it was a good time to catch fish. And he would go out on the boat, we'd go out on the boat, and we could catch, 2 dozen sunfish in 15 minutes and all. Nothing. They bit like mad. The fishing was so fabulous.
Did you keep them all?
Oh, sure, we ate them. Of course, we kept them all. But I vowed I never went to clean fish.
So then you talk about what else did we do? Well, again, probably everyone had some chores, definitely, if you lived on the farm, and that took up some of your time. But I always remember one good story that my father told me. He said, well, you're going to weed the potato patch today, and it was a hot day, and I thought, wow, the weeds were and whatever the potatoes were. So I always kind of thought about things, and I thought, potatoes grow in the ground and so on. So I said, why do they have to have all of this thing, growing on the top? They just grow in the ground. So I just took the scythe out or the sickle, and I ended up, and I and my cousin, we cut everything down in the potato patch. And carried it up and cleaned it all out, and I can still see the look on my dad when he came home from work and looked out in the garden. Everything was cut down. Needless to say, we had potatoes that were about that big.
That's funny.
Well, I think in the summers, kids worked at home. I don't think there was chores. I bet every one of us had chores to do. It wasn't quite the same. There was a lot of work done between the play. Between that. And in high school, people worked in the summer usually, but not so much during the school year. Like kids do now. They didn't work so much during the school year.
When you're doing 3 sports and band and choir and plays, there was no time.
Right.
So, did you lose any classmates in your time? Did you?
I didn't, and World War II was just over, so there wasn't wasn't any wars going on.
No.
You mean during school?
During school or shortly after, whatever.
George Ross.
Yeah.
There was, we had one that was in a car accident.
No, it's anything.
Then we had one also that was a little bit after that actually drowned. Chucky Lumpus was named after. The park.
But you had wartime.
Yeah, how about Vietnam?
We were Vietnam War era. I will say that the war figured dominantly in our growing up. I can remember getting up every morning and listening, turning on the radio, and as I was getting ready for school, and it was always, the count was this many Vietnam dead and this many, and it was like this tally that was being used to sort of justify it, like 700 Viet Cong dead and 2 GIs, 2 Americans were killed, and that was, you know, it was this, you know, this was before the protests started. This was in the early 60s. And by the time, you know, we graduated, the protests, you know, became in full swing and just subsequent to that. But certainly in my class, and I don't know about in your class, the idea was to try to avoid the draft. And so the first you could avoid it, I mean, if you were going to college. And then you could avoid it if you were, I mean, it was subsequential. And then you could, if you were married, you were exempted. And then if you had kids, you were exempted. And I know there was a couple in my class ahead of me, not my class, who moved their wedding up 2 weeks. It was already planned. They were out of school, and their wedding was planned, and they moved. They didn't move the ceremony up, but they went to the priest and got married 2 weeks before their actual wedding ceremony, so they could make the exemption.
So did the draft come in after that? Or?
No, the draft, everybody had a draft number. You guys can speak to that.
So yeah, Jimmy can go for,
I wouldn't say that they didn't avoid the draft, but they either went to school. A lot of them were drafted. And a lot of them served, I mean, through the Navy, Marines, Army, whatever. But when I got drafted in '68, when I got out, Johnny went in '70.
I was in the lottery, okay, so I can always remember that vividly. I was up at school at St. Cloud and sat around, and we all, actually in the fraternity house, and we actually all threw $1 in. And when the lottery numbers came out, and the guy with the lowest lottery number took the money, okay? And why I really remember that was it was so ironic. The guy that got the lowest lottery number, back where he lived, his father was on the draft board. And so it was kind of, you know, he got the money, and I'm just saying it was that type of thing. And yeah, it was a thing that we knew of someone that actually avoided the draft, going to Canada. We knew of someone in our class that got I don't know whether drafted, I would assume, and went to Vietnam and contacted a lot on the Agent Orange and actually passed away from the Agent Orange.
Wasn't Gary Quincher in your class?
Huh?
Gary Quincher, wasn't he in your class?
You know, he was younger than us.
Oh.
And so yeah, there was definitely some great effects from that.
Everybody made it back.
No, well, everyone in our classes, but in our community, Jerry Bevan.
Right, but I mean in our class I'm talking about.
Yeah.
In your class.
He was
Everybody
old.
made it back.
Well, he was old.
Some died from results of it later on, or physically, mentally not the same after that.
I was, during the Korean War was on at the end of our school year. And I was out of high school, I went to work for Shafer Contracts and started raking John Matson's lawn. That's how I started with him. But anyway, I was there a long time for that whole year, and I wanted to go with them to the Azores Islands when they went over there. But I had to go to the draft board and let them know that I was going to leave the country. Well, it only took 1 week till I got drafted. I never got to go, but it worked out.
So did you go to Korea?
No, I didn't. I was a cook. It was funny because I had all this experience of equipment operating, and I signed up for that, but they don't want you because you've got experience. So the third choice was cook, and I was fortunate I got to do that. And I spent my whole time in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which was like a college.
Yeah, and again, just on that same, I got, my lottery number did finally come up, so I did get, I had a few credits left before I graduated, but the number was up, and I went and served, but I ended up going to Europe and had a good, I mean, it was an adventure over in Europe, so, yeah.
So how did high school help shape who you are over your lifetime?
That we'll never know. I'm sure everybody our age went to small school to see.
We were only 19 in our class.
19 in your class.
And 5 girls, as I mentioned. I married one, Janet Hansen.
We had 51 that included Stacy. We probably had 20-something.
27 in your class? How many?
Yeah, we were in the same, so it was about 51 or so.
51.
Combined between Wyoming and Stacy that were
At that
students
time, that
they
they came to Chisago, Stacy and Wyoming.
How many?
Our class was 54. For me, it definitely shaped what I did because when I believe it was either a freshman or a sophomore, when Maury Henrickson, who had worked for Forest Lake Times and Peach, split off and started his own shopper with news that was called Chisago Lakes Life. And it was the first time that it was shopper, so it was distributed, free distribution to the whole community with ads. But then he wanted to add news to this little shopper. The Chisago County Press still existed, and it was being operated. It was kind of stodgy, had gotten and so he wanted to bring some life. That's when he used Chisago Lakes Life. And so he came to the school, recognizing that parents want to read about their kids. And he asked the school if they had someone who could write school news for the Chisago Lakes Life, a weekly column. So I started writing a weekly column for Chisago Lakes Life. It was called Indian Smoke Signals. And again, would be so socially unacceptable today. But I wrote that for at least a couple of years, once a week, and it had all the news about what was happening coming up at school, homecoming, football games, and it was kind of a predecessor to, I think, what's happened today in that, now newspapers certainly focus locally on a good portion of their pages on school news, and it's a good method. It was, and Maury then later purchased the Chisago County Press. And later, after I was married and had 2 kids, I went back and started working for Maury, and he knew me from that high school experience. And I worked at the press for 22 years as reporter and editor, and then went on in public relations and marketing for 26 years. So I think it's definitely shaped my life.
So you guys all lived here in town. So when the consolidation came, was it hard to watch your high school be consolidated, or were you resolved to the fact that it was inevitable?
It was 4 years later, 4 years. We were.
You mean, what did
What do you
we think?
remember? What did you think? What do you remember?
Well, I always thought there was rumors or a vote, or I thought they always discussed a little bit earlier than when it actually did go
Went on for
through.
years.
Went on for years as far as, but again, how can I say, politically correct, the base of the stubborn Swedes or whatever have you, or the identity. Nobody wanted to lose their identity. Excuse me, and I think that was a part of growing up. I thought, we identified as students from Chisago. Activity-wise, it really gave you an opportunity to participate being a smaller student. A lot of a lot of things, and that just by the small numbers, you kind of wanted to or had to participate if that function actually had to occur, you know, if there was a band or whatever, we're looking back. But not getting back onto that, so I think it was, at least for me, I thought it was inevitable, and I think in order to progress, especially from the standpoint of scholastic-wise and opportunities, in other words, that to me was a little bit of what we really didn't have the equipment, the curriculum that we needed if you wanted to go further, whether it was low tech, whether it was college or whatever have you. That really was, I think, a tough thing to do.
You know,
I think it was for the better, and I know there was a lot of things, like you said, that they would lose their identity, the towns, you know, but I think it was all for the better.
Oh, absolutely.
What you had available to you.
Yes.
You know, the consolidation had started when, you know, Wyoming and Stacy were given, they had to consolidate, like Wyoming could choose where they wanted to go, so part of them went to Forest Lake and part of them came to Chisago. That had already been happening. The debate between Chisago and Lindstrom consolidating, I mean, it was quite embittered. It was very contentious. It created rifts in the community.
It was the parents that started.
Yeah,
It wasn't us.
no, not the students. It was, but there were eight bond issues. Did not pass till the 8th bond issue. So this went on for a decade. There were 8 bond issues until it passed. My kids, my children, were in the first consolidate. So it was after, in the 70s, you know, the new high school opened in 76. And so consolidation had happened, you know, prior to that. It took some time to build the school. But I think that what you're talking about, the opportunities, Chisago City High School was a great fun place to be. It was the school growing up there in the 50s, it was a typical 50s scenario of the U.S. in the 1950s. It was a wonderful place to grow up. But Chisago City High School was not, did not afford a great deal really of academic opportunities. I mean, quite honestly, we're very limited. Yeah. I mean, they struggled to get teachers. Teachers were extremely poorly paid. I mean, it was truly pathetic what teachers were paid in those days. And I think that there's no question that the kids today and in the subsequent have been far better off once the consolidation took place. The opportunities, you know, look what they're offered. I mean, it was a wonderful thing to happen.
I think the big thing was, where is this high school going to be? Which town is it going to be? That was a big thing.
Okay, so any other thoughts? And then we're going to try that school song again. Any other comments? Anything else that you feel like you wish people could know? You wish those kids out there in the hall could know about Chisago City High School that we missed? You did a great job, by the way.
Well, I know we didn't have the police at the school, you know, monitors, because everybody kind of took care of themselves.
They're more worried about their parents.
Oh, yeah. And I don't remember drugs in school at all.
But they were different, you know, we didn't have iPads, electronic stuff. I didn't have TVs or phones and all. If I wanted to go find him, I had to go on my bike and find him. You know, he was somewhere, or vice versa. And we'd find a small, somebody that had a big enough yard so we could play baseball. Because there weren't any community organized sports, or they weren't traveling teams that they had and all that. We traveled to Old Town, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, our parents didn't drive us everywhere. Even when I can remember the last year before I started working, I walked from my house, which was near where Paradise Park is now, and I walked to the beach, which is out where Parley is. I mean, I carried my blanket and my transistor radio, and nobody's giving me a ride to those women there. I mean, you want, to have to go.
Was there an activity
So I don't
bus?
think the kids would relate to what we grew up with. Like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, really, the boys, when we were younger.
Did you have an activity bus for after sports?
No. Yeah, so I just to recap, I think things were, how can I say, a little bit more laid back, a little more not, parents were communicated in a different way and knew everyone and so on and so forth, and so that it really felt like a community, and we went to school and we knew everybody from the grades on either side of us, and it was not a, I don't want to use the term disjointed, but when we moved through our education process, it was a gradual progression of whether it was the greatest progression from a quote a true educational standpoint of view, but it was a good, warm, puppy feel.
Yeah, that's nice.
And we had 4 buses, and there was nobody taking us home after practice, or we got our own way
I
home.
think my dad drove a lot of people.
Yeah. And, the funny part is, I got to tell you about this. Carl Lindbergh drove a bus. And one day coming to school, Mikla and Thompson, Dr. Thompson and Mikla, rode on his bus, and they were always arguing who was the fastest. So he let them out out by the crossroads past your farm, and let them run, see who was going to be the first, in front of the bus. These 2 kids running in front of the bus. Can you imagine doing that now?
Well, that's what you have to understand. The bus drivers and the custodians at the school and the bus, they were, you knew them by name, they knew you by name. I remember when I got sick, when I was in grade school, my mother was working. She had a job and she was at work. And I got sick at school, and there was no school nurse or no sick room. If you were sick, you had to go home. The janitor brought me home, dropped me off at my house. Nobody was home at my house. Dropped me off at my house, and I went up and I went to bed. But when my mother came home, she said, "Oh, what are you doing home?" I said, "I'm sick. They dropped me off at school."
I think the nurse was Evelyn Keesberg. No, Evelyn Keesberg. You're not sick.
Okay, so you're ready to try that school song again?
Oh, I still don't know it. Spread out your glory, boys. Spread out your fame. Get right in there and fight, and we will win this game. Rock, rock, rock. You will always do your honor's fame. I'll be careful. It's on.
INVIANS.